He swore never to love her again, but fate had other plans, a story of passion and reunion. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Ryan Bennett stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, watching the New York sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. The view hadn't changed in 5 years, but he had. The reflection staring back at him in the glass showed a man hardened by time, still handsome at 38, but with grey starting to pepper his dark hair at the temples and lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His phone buzzed on the mahogany desk behind him. Without looking, he knew it would be another message about the Chicago conference. As one of New York's top corporate lawyers, his presence at these events was expected, almost mandatory. Usually, he sent his associates in his place, but this time, the client had specifically requested him. "Dad, can we get ice cream after dinner?" Lucas's voice from that morning echoed in his mind. His son's weekend visits were the only times Ryan truly felt alive anymore, when the weight of his tailored suits and corporate responsibilities fell away. He'd promised to take Lucas for ice cream when he returned from Chicago, marking it in his calendar with the same gravity as any client meeting. The phone buzzed again. Ryan finally turned from the window, picking it up to read the latest email about the Palmer Foundation Gala. His eyes scanned the guest list mechanically until they stopped on a name that made his heart stutter: Emma Sullivan. 5 years of carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble at the mere sight of her name. He sat heavily in his leather chair, the email still glowing on his screen. Emma, in Chicago, at the same event. "Mr. Bennett?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your brother's here to see you." Ryan cleared his throat. "Send him in." Nathan Bennett strode into the office, his casual attire a stark contrast to Ryan's pristine suit. As a successful restaurateur, Nathan had always moved through life with an ease Ryan envied, especially since Emma left. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Nathan said, dropping into the chair across from Ryan's desk. Ryan turned his phone screen toward his brother. Nathan leaned forward, his eyes widening as he read. "Well, shit. She's bringing Lucas," Ryan added, his voice rough. "Apparently she's in Chicago for work, and since it's her weekend—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe it's time," Nathan said carefully. 5 years is a long time to carry around that much anger. "I'm not angry," Ryan snapped, then caught himself. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "I'm indifferent." Nathan's skeptical look said everything. "Right. That's why you haven't dated anyone seriously since she left, because you're indifferent." Ryan stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. The city lights were starting to twinkle to life below, 1,000 tiny stars in the growing dusk. "She left without a word, Nathan. Took our son and disappeared for weeks before her lawyer contacted mine." "Who does that?" "Someone with a reason," Nathan suggested quietly. "What reason could possibly justify—" Ryan cut himself off, his jaw clenching. He'd had this argument with himself countless times over the years. The way Emma had left hadn't made sense. Nothing about it had. The woman who had looked at him with such love, who had built a life with him, who had given him the greatest gift in Lucas. She wouldn't have just walked away, would she? "The gala's in 3 days, Nathan said, standing. "Just try to keep an open mind, for Lucas's sake, if nothing else." Ryan nodded stiffly, but his mind was already racing ahead to Chicago, to the moment he would see her again. Would her honey-brown hair still fall in those soft waves? Would her eyes still crinkle at the corners when she smiled? Would she smile at all when she saw him? After Nathan left, Ryan remained in his office long after the sun had set completely. He pulled up an old photo on his phone, one he'd never been able to delete. Emma and Lucas at the beach, both laughing as waves crashed around their ankles. Lucas had been too. Emma's hair was windblown, her smile radiant. She'd been his whole world then. The photo blurred, and Ryan quickly locked his phone screen. He had meetings to prepare for, briefs to review. He couldn't afford to get lost in memories of what he'd lost. But as he gathered his things to head home, one thought kept circling in his mind. In 3 days, he would see Emma Sullivan again, and nothing in all his legal training had prepared him for that. Emma Sullivan stared at the emerald green gown hanging on her hotel room door. Its silk fabric catching the late afternoon light streaming through the Chicago high-rise windows. The dress was perfect for the Palmer Foundation gala, elegant, sophisticated, and completely wrong for hiding in the background. Which was exactly what Sophie, her best friend and fellow journalist, had intended when she helped choose it. "You can't avoid him forever," Sophie's words from their last phone call echoed in her mind. Besides, Lucas deserves to see his parents in the same room without tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Lucas. Emma glanced at her son, sprawled on the hotel room carpet with his favorite dinosaur books. He had Ryan's dark hair and her determination, a combination that both delighted and terrified her. At 7, he was already too perceptive, asking questions that made her heart ache. "Mom?" Lucas looked up from his book. "Is Dad really coming to the party?" Emma sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. Lucas scrambled up to join her, his small face serious. "Yes, sweetheart. He has some work to do in Chicago. This week." "Like your work?" Lucas asked, fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. "The special stories you write?" A knot formed in Emma's throat. Her work as an investigative journalist. It had cost her everything 5 years ago. One story, one threat, one impossible choice. She'd uncovered corruption at the highest levels of a prominent law firm, not realizing until too late that the firm had connections to Ryan's biggest client. When the threats came, they weren't aimed at her. "Sort of," she managed, smoothing Lucas's unruly hair. "But different, too. Your dad helps people with complicated legal problems." "I know," Lucas said proudly. "He fights bad guys in court like a superhero with a tie instead of a cape." Emma's laugh caught on a sob. She pulled Lucas close, breathing in the sweet scent of his shampoo. How many nights had she lain awake, wondering if she'd made the right choice? Leaving Ryan had felt like cutting out her own heart, but the alternative, watching him lose everything he'd worked for, or worse, had been unthinkable. Her phone chimed with a text from Sophie. "Dress rehearsal time. Send pics." "Hey, buddy," Emma said, giving Lucas a squeeze. "Want to help me practice getting ready for the party? You can be my fashion consultant." Lucas's face lit up. "Can I wear my bow tie too?" "Of course." Emma walked to the garment bag containing Lucas's suit. A proper consultant needs to look the part. As she helped Lucas with his tie, memories flooded back. Ryan teaching their 4-year-old how to make funny faces in the mirror while attempting his first clip-on bow tie. The way Ryan's hands had trembled slightly at their wedding as he'd adjusted his own tie. The domestic moments that had made up their life together, now preserved in amber like precious insects, beautiful and untouchable. An hour later, Emma stood before the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The emerald dress fit perfectly, highlighting curves that her usual journalist's wardrobe of blazers and slacks concealed. Her honey-brown hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, longer than she'd worn it during her married years. Diamond drops sparkled at her ears, a gift from her first major story, a reminder of the career she'd chosen over personal happiness. "You look like a princess, Mom," Lucas declared from his perch on the bed, bow tie slightly askew. Emma smiled at their reflection. "And you look like a very handsome prince." Her phone buzzed again, this time with an email from the gala organizers, the final guest list. Her finger hovered over the attachment, heart pounding. Would Ryan bring a date? The society pages occasionally linked him to various women, each accomplished and beautiful. She had no right to care, she reminded herself. She'd given up that right the day she walked away. "Mom," Lucas's voice was small, "do you think Dad will be happy to see us?" Emma turned from the mirror, kneeling carefully in her dress to meet her son's eyes. "Your dad is always happy to see you, Lucas. Always. But what about you?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Emma thought of the last time she'd seen Ryan, at Lucas's school play 4 months ago. They'd sat 3 rows apart, exchanging only the barest pleasantries. His eyes had been cold, professional. The same expression he wore in courthouse photographs. Nothing like the warm brown eyes that used to look at her like she was his whole world. "It's complicated, sweetie," she said finally. "Sometimes grown-ups, sometimes we hurt each other even when we don't mean to, even when we're trying to protect each other." Lucas considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Like in my Spider-Man comics? When he had to stay away from MJ to keep her safe?" A wet laugh escaped Emma's lips. "Something like that." Standing, she smoothed her dress and checked her makeup one last time. In 24 hours, she would see Ryan again. The thought sent equal waves of terror and longing through her body. 5 years of carefully maintained distance was about to collapse into a single evening. "Sophie says you still love Dad," Lucas said matter-of-factly, returning to his dinosaur book. "She says you can see it in your eyes when someone says his name." Emma's hand froze on her lipstick. In the mirror, her reflection stared back, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sophie talks too much," she whispered, but Lucas was already absorbed. In his reading, oblivious to how close to the truth he'd struck. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the hotel windows, a constellation of lights in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Ryan was probably preparing for tomorrow too. Did he still take his coffee black in the mornings? Did he still work late into the night, his reading glasses sliding down his nose? Did he ever think about the life they'd had, the love they'd lost? Tomorrow, she would have to face him, and the truth she'd buried 5 years ago. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of weakness, one silent admission in the privacy of her hotel room. Sophie was right. Some loves never truly die. They just go into hiding, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The Palmer Foundation Gala transformed Chicago's Grand Medallion Ballroom into a sea of elegant gowns and tailored tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the crowd, their sparkle reflected in the champagne flutes that circulated on silver trays. Ryan Bennett stood near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his untouched drink providing an excuse for his stillness as he scanned the room. He'd arrived deliberately late, hoping to slip in unnoticed. The strategy had failed spectacularly. 3 potential clients had already cornered him for quick chats about their legal needs. Ryan had nodded, smiled, and made all the right noises while his attention remained fixed on the entrance. "Mr. Bennett?" A small voice cut through his distraction. "I mean, Dad?" Ryan turned to find Lucas standing there in a perfectly fitted suit, complete with a slightly crooked bow tie that made his heart clench. Without hesitation, he knelt down to his son's level, corporate mask falling away. "Hey, champion. You look incredibly handsome." Lucas beamed, throwing his arms around Ryan's neck. The familiar weight of his son's embrace grounded him, even as his eyes lifted to search for Emma. He found her immediately, standing just inside the ballroom's grand entrance. The years fell away like autumn leaves. Emma wore emerald silk that caught the light with every breath, her honey-brown hair falling in waves that he remembered running his fingers through countless times. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment the air between them crackled with electricity. "Mom helped me pick the tie," Lucas said, pulling back from the hug. She said you'd like it because it matches your favorite one. The blue, one with little dots. Ryan's throat tightened. He still had that tie, though he hadn't worn it since she left. She was right. Great choice, buddy. Can we all sit together? Lucas asked, hope shining in his eyes. Please? Mom said I should ask you because you might be sitting with work people, but I really want... Of course we can, Ryan interrupted softly, surprising himself. He straightened up, keeping one hand on Lucas's shoulder as Emma approached. Her perfume reached him first, jasmine and vanilla, achingly familiar. Ryan. His name on her lips was barely more than a whisper. Emma. He managed a slight nod, professional courtesy, warring with the urge to either shake her or pull her close. He wasn't sure which. I hope it's okay that Lucas found you, she said, smoothing her dress in a nervous gesture he remembered well. He's been excited all day. It's more than okay. Ryan's voice came out rougher than he intended. He mentioned sitting together. Over dinner? Emma's eyes widened slightly. Oh, you don't have to. I want to, he cut in, then added more gently, for Lucas. A shadow crossed her face, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. For Lucas, she echoed. Their son, obviously pleased with this development, grabbed both their hands. Can we get dessert first? There's a chocolate fountain. Dinner. First, they said in unison, then caught each other's eyes in surprise. Emma's laugh was soft and startled, like a bird taking flight. Ryan felt something crack in his chest, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd built around his heart. They found their way to a table near the dance floor, Lucas chattering happily between them. Ryan pulled out Emma's chair automatically, an old habit he regretted, as soon as her shocked expression registered. Her bare shoulder brushed his hand as she sat, and he jerked back as if burned. Still a gentleman, she murmured almost to herself. Some things don't change, he replied, taking his own seat. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Dinner proceeded with careful conversation, mostly directed through Lucas. Ryan learned that Emma's latest story had exposed corruption in Chicago's building industry. She learned that he'd recently won a major case protecting environmental whistleblowers. Their eyes met and darted away, again and again, like moths drawn to and repelled by the same flame. Dance with Mom, Lucas said suddenly, as the orchestra struck up a slow waltz. Please, like in the pictures at home. Ryan's hand clenched around his water glass. Lucas, I don't think... Please? Their son's lower lip trembled slightly. For my birthday? Your birthday isn't for 3 months, Emma pointed out gently. Early present? Lucas tried, looking between them with pleading eyes. Ryan met Emma's gaze across the table. She looked as trapped as he felt, her fingers worrying the stem of her wine glass. The song playing was an old standard, The Way. You look tonight, their wedding song. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. One dance, Ryan heard himself say, if your mother agrees. Emma's breath caught audibly. After a long moment, she nodded. One dance. They rose simultaneously, moving toward the dance floor with the cautious steps of people approaching a precipice. Ryan's hand settled on her waist as Emma's came to rest on his shoulder. The familiar position felt like coming home and being lost all at once. You look beautiful, he said quietly, because it was true and because he couldn't bear the silence. Ryan! Her voice held a warning or perhaps a plea. They moved together seamlessly, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. Emma's hand was warm in his, her body following his lead as naturally as it had years ago. The scent of her perfume wrapped around him, making his head spin. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. After all this time, I deserve to know why. Emma's steps faltered. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Mr. Bennett? A booming voice cut through the moment. Just the man I wanted to see. They turned to find Charles, Palmer himself approaching, resplendent in a white dinner jacket. Emma used the interruption to step back, breaking their connection. The loss of contact felt like a physical wound. "I need to check on Lucas," she whispered, already turning away. "Emma, wait." But she was gone, disappearing into the crowd. Like smoke, Ryan watched her retreat, even as Charles Palmer launched into a discussion about legal representation. The question burned in his throat, unanswered. Their one dance had left him with more questions than before, and a terrible certainty that he wasn't as immune to Emma Sullivan as he'd convinced himself he was. At their table, Lucas watched his parents with a thoughtful expression that belonged on a much older face. He pulled out his phone, a recent birthday gift, and quickly typed out a message to his Aunt Sophie. Operation Parent Trap is working. They danced. Dad looked at Mum like in the old pictures. What's next? Emma's hands shook as she splashed cold water on her wrists in the ladies' room, an old trick her mother had taught her for calming nerves. It wasn't working. The ghost of Ryan's touch still burned through her silk dress, his cologne lingering in her senses like a stubborn memory. The bathroom door swung open. Emma straightened, expecting another gala attendee, but found Lucas and Sophie instead. Her son's bow tie was now completely askew, and her best friend wore an expression that mixed concern with determination. "He's with the Palmer guy," Lucas reported, as if delivering vital intelligence. "Aunt Sophie said I should find you." "Did she now?" Emma shot Sophie a look that promised future retribution. Her friend merely shrugged, elegant in midnight blue. "Someone had to do something," Sophie said, checking her lipstick in the mirror. "You two were about to spontaneously combust on the dance floor." The sexual tension was making the elderly couples blush. "Sophie!" Emma hissed, glancing at Lucas, but he was already wandering toward the door, attention captured by his phone. "I'm going to find Dad," he announced. "He promised to show me the chocolate fountain." Before Emma could protest, Sophie called out, "Great idea, buddy. Your mom will meet you there in a few minutes." The door swung shut behind Lucas, leaving Emma alone with her too perceptive friend. "I know what you're doing," Emma said quietly. "Trying to help you fix the biggest mistake of your life. Guilty as charged." Sophie turned to face her fully. "Em, I saw the way he looked at you during that dance. That man is not over you. He hates me." Love and hate are two sides of the same coin, honey. And that wasn't hatred in his eyes when you were in his arms. Emma's carefully constructed composure cracked. "I can't, Sophie. You don't understand. If he knew the truth, then tell him. Tell him about the threats, about protecting his career, about all of it. Let him decide how he feels about it instead of making that choice for him." Again, the words hit like physical blows. Emma gripped the marble counter, her reflection pale in the ornate mirror. "It's not that simple." "It never is." Sophie's voice softened. "But he deserves to know, and you deserve to stop carrying this alone." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Miss Sullivan?" A staff member's voice called through. "Mr. Bennett is asking for you. Something about your son and the chocolate fountain?" Emma closed her eyes briefly. "Of course he is." She found them in the garden terrace adjacent to the ballroom. The space was lit by strings of fairy lights that transformed the Chicago night into something magical. Ryan stood with his jacket off and sleeves rolled up, helping Lucas clean chocolate from his hands with a napkin. "I turn my back for 5 minutes," Emma said, announcing her presence. Ryan looked up, and the intimacy of the scene, so like countless moments from their shared past, made her heart stutter. "He's definitely your son," he said, a hint of their old warmth in his voice, determined to test every hypothesis about chocolate physics. "I wanted to see if different things float," Lucas explained earnestly. "The strawberries do, but the marshmallows sink and get all soggy." "Very scientific," Emma managed, fighting back tears at their easy interaction. Ryan must have noticed, something in her expression, because his own softened momentarily before the professional mask slipped back into place. "Lucas, why don't you go find your Aunt Sophie? I need to talk to your mother for a minute." Their son looked between them, hope brightening his features. "Okay, but don't fight." "We won't," Ryan promised, ruffling Lucas's hair. "Go on." Once they were alone, the fairy light seemed to take on a different quality, less magical, more exposing. Ryan stepped closer, close enough that Emma could see the faint scar above his eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd once told her about. "Dance with me again," he said softly. Emma's heart jumped. "Ryan, not inside. Here." He gestured to the terrace. "Where I can actually ask you what I need to ask without Charles Palmer or anyone else interrupting." "Mother." The orchestra music drifted out through the open doors, muted but clear enough. Emma knew she should refuse, knew that every moment in his arms weakened her resolve. Instead, she found herself stepping into his embrace, her body betraying her. Mind's better judgment. They swayed together under the stars, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop. This time, Ryan held her closer, one hand splayed across her lower back, while the other entwined with hers. "Tell me the truth," he murmured against her hair. "The real reason you left, not the story your lawyers told mine." Emma's breath caught. "I can't. Can't or won't." His fingers tightened slightly on her back. "Because I've spent 5 years trying to understand how the woman who promised to love me forever could just disappear. How the mother of my child could—" His voice broke slightly. "Ryan, please." Tears slid down her cheeks now, unchecked. "Some things are better left in the past." He pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes intense in the dim light. "Better for whom? Because I've been living with this hole in my chest for 5 years, Emma. Lucas has been living with divorced parents who can barely look at each other. Tell me who that's better for." The truth rose in her throat like bile, desperate to escape. The weight of her secret felt suddenly unbearable, crushing her under years of accumulated guilt and longing. "They were going to destroy you," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Your biggest client. They were involved in the corruption I uncovered. They said they'd ruin your career, your reputation, everything you'd worked for. They said—" She choked on a sob. "They said they'd make sure you never practiced law again." Ryan's hands stilled on her body. "What?" "I had proof of criminal activity at the highest levels, but they had connections everywhere. They said they'd plant evidence, make it look like you were involved, you were up for partner. I couldn't let them—" "So you left?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Without telling me? Without letting me decide if my career was worth losing you over?" "They were watching us. I couldn't risk—" "Damn it, Emma!" The explosion of emotion made her flinch. Ryan's hands moved to cup her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I would have given up everything, the partnership, the career, all of it, for you, for us." "I know," she whispered, reaching up to grip his wrists. "That's why I couldn't tell you. You would have fought them, and they would have destroyed you. I couldn't watch that happen. I couldn't be the reason—" His mouth crashed into hers, cutting off her words. The kiss was desperate, angry. 5 years of pain and longing poured into a single point of contact. Emma gasped against his lips, her hands clutching at his shirt. As the world spun around them, when they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. "You impossible, stubborn, infuriating woman," he muttered. "Do you have any idea what you did to me?" Before Emma could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. "Mom? Dad? Is everything okay?" They turned to find Lucas watching them, Sophie hovering protectively behind him. Their son's eyes were wide, taking in his mother's tears and his father's intense expression. But it was the hope in his face, raw and vulnerable, that broke Emma's heart all over again. The truth was out now, at least part of it, but as Ryan's hands slowly fell away from her face, Emma realized that sometimes the hardest part isn't telling the truth. It's living with the consequences of keeping it hidden for so long. The drive back to the hotel was silent. Sophie had offered to take Lucas for the night, giving Ryan and Emma time to talk. Now, sitting in the back of a luxury car service, Emma watched the Chicago streets blur past her window, all too aware of Ryan's presence beside her. His jacket was draped over her shoulders, another unconscious gesture from earlier that neither of them had addressed. The kiss lingered between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Even more pressing was the weight of her confession, the truth she'd guarded for 5 years, now hanging in the open air like smoke after a fire. Who was it? Ryan's voice was controlled, dangerous. Which client? Emma turned from the window to study his profile. His jaw was set, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Ryan, I need names, Emma. Dates, details. He finally looked at her, his eyes dark with barely contained fury. Everything you didn't tell me 5 years ago. I need all of it. The car pulled up to her hotel. Ryan stepped out first, offering his hand automatically. The gesture felt like another echo from their past life, when such courtesies had been natural, expected. Now it made her chest ache. They rode the elevator in tense silence. Emma's room was on the 23rd floor with a view of the city. She'd barely noticed when she checked in. Now, as she swiped her keycard with trembling fingers, that same view stretched out before them through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's lights competing with the stars. Whitman and Reed, she said, quietly, setting her clutch on a side table. The development company that hired your firm in 2019. They weren't just destroying historic buildings, they were laundering money for half the corrupt politicians in the state. Ryan went very still. James Whitman. He was at my promotion ceremony. He brought his grandchildren to the firm's Christmas party. The grandfatherly act was a good cover. Emma slipped off her heels, buying time. I had documentation proving they'd bribed officials, falsified environmental reports, even covered up 2 deaths at their construction sites. But when I took it to my editor, things started happening. Strange cars outside our house, hang-up calls at all hours. Then the email came. She walked to her laptop bag, removing a small USB drive from a hidden pocket. I kept everything, the threats, the proof, all of it. I couldn't delete it, even though I knew I should. Ryan took the drive, turning it over in his hands. Why? Didn't you go to the police? They had people in the department. I didn't know who to trust. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, still wearing his jacket. Then they sent photos. You and Lucas at the park, you leaving work, Lucas at school. They knew everything about our lives. When they threatened to destroy your career, to make it look like you'd been helping them cover everything up. I panicked. So you ran. His voice cracked slightly. Took our son and disappeared. I thought I was protecting you both. The tears came again, hot and unstoppable. You'd worked so hard to make partner. Lucas was so proud of his daddy, the lawyer who helped people. I couldn't bear the thought of them taking that away from you, of Lucas seeing his father's name, dragged through the mud because of my story. Ryan set the USB drive down carefully, deliberately. Then in a sudden burst of movement, he swept a hotel water glass off the desk, sending it shattering against the wall. Emma jumped, but didn't retreat. Damn it, Emma! He raked his hands through his hair, destroying its careful styling. Did you really think so little of me? That I'd choose my career over my family, over you? No! The word burst from her. That's exactly why I couldn't tell you. You would have fought them, and they would have destroyed everything you'd built. I couldn't be the reason. You were everything I'd built. And the raw pain in his voice made her flinch. The career, the partnership, none of it meant anything without you and Lucas. When you left, he trailed off, turning to stare out at the city. I became a ghost in my own life. going through the motions, trying to understand what I'd done wrong, why you'd thrown away 10 years of marriage without a word. Emma moved toward him slowly, drawn by the tension in his shoulders, the grief in his voice. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "Even when I knew you must hate me, I never stopped." Ryan turned, and suddenly they were too close. The air between them charged with 5 years of unspoken words and suppressed longing. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I tried to hate you," he admitted roughly. "God knows I tried. But seeing you tonight, dancing with you, holding you again, I realized I've been lying to myself for 5 years. I never stopped loving you either." The confession hung in the air for a heartbeat before his mouth found hers. Unlike the angry, desperate kiss on the terrace, this one was slower, deeper, heavy with rediscovered tenderness. Emma's hands fisted in his shirt as his arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. They broke apart only when Emma's phone chimed. A text from Sophie sending a photo of Lucas, fast asleep in the hotel suite she shared with her filming crew, his bow tie finally completely undone. Reality crashed back in as they looked at their sleeping son's face. Emma stepped back, though every cell in her body protested the distance. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Ryan's expression hardened with determination. "Now? Now I take everything you have on Whitman and Reed, and I burn their whole corrupt empire to the ground, legally, publicly. No more running, no more secrets. They'll come after you. Let them try." He pulled her close again, pressing a fierce kiss to her forehead. "But this time we face them together. No more noble sacrifices, Emma. No more protecting me from my own choices." She looked up at him, seeing not just the polished lawyer from tonight's gala, but the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Passionate, principled, and unstoppable when protecting those he loved. "Together," she agreed, her voice stronger than she felt. As if in answer, her phone chimed again. Another message from Sophie. "Operation Parent Trap status update. Lucas is officially passed out, dreaming of chocolate fountains and his parents' dance. Please tell me you two are finally talking, and maybe doing other things that require privacy and a do not disturb sign." Despite everything, Emma laughed, showing Ryan the message. His answering smile held a heat that made her breath catch. "Sophie always did have terrible timing," he murmured, reaching for her again, "and excellent suggestions." Outside the window, Chicago sparkled like a sea of stars, unknowing witness to a love story writing its next chapter, a truth finally unveiled and a battle yet to come. But for now, in a hotel room 23 floors above the city, two people who had never stopped loving each other began the delicate work of finding their way back home. Emma woke to early morning sunlight and the steady rhythm of Ryan's heartbeat under her ear. For a moment, disorientation hit, the familiar sensation of his arms around her warring with 5 years of waking up alone. She lifted her head carefully, studying his sleeping face. The years had left their mark in the slight grey at his temples, the faint lines around his eyes, but in sleep he looked younger, unburdened. Her movement must have roused him because his arms tightened instinctively. "Don't go," he murmured, eyes still closed. The vulnerability in his voice made her throat tight. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "But Sophie will be bringing Lucas back soon." That got his attention. Ryan's eyes opened, finding hers in the soft morning light. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, rediscovering familiar features and cataloguing changes. His hand came up to trace her cheek, as if making sure she was real. "We should talk about what happens next," he said finally, though he made no move to let her go. Emma nodded, settling back against his chest. "I have copies of everything, documents, photos, recordings. The original story never ran because of their threats, but I kept investigating. Over the years, I've gathered even more evidence of their corruption. And you've been carrying this alone all this time. It wasn't quite a question. Ryan's fingers tangled in her hair, gentle but possessive. That stops now. Ryan, no. He shifted to look at her properly. I mean it, Emma. No more noble sacrifices, remember? We do this together or not at all. The determination in his voice warmed her, even as anxiety twisted in her stomach. They're dangerous. What they threatened before, they could still do it. Your career... Listen to me. Ryan sat up, bringing her with him. The sheet pooled around their waists as he took her face in his hands. 5 years ago, you made a choice that broke us. Both because you thought you were protecting me, but my career isn't worth our family. It never was. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. You worked so hard to make partner, to build your reputation. And in the 5 years you've been gone, none of it has meant a damn thing. His thumbs brushed away her tears. Success means nothing when you're coming home to an empty house, when your son asks why his mother isn't there, when the woman you love thinks she has to carry the weight of the world alone. A knock at the door interrupted them. Room service. They looked at each other in confusion. Neither had ordered breakfast. Emma pulled on Ryan's dress shirt from the night before while he found his pants. When they opened the door, they found not hotel staff but Sophie, grinning broadly and holding up a bag from a nearby bakery. Good morning, lovebirds. Don't worry, Lucas is still sleeping off his chocolate fountain adventure. I have about 30 minutes before he wakes up and starts asking for you both. She breezed past them, setting the bag on the desk. I also brought this. She pulled out a thick manila envelope. Everything we've gathered on Whitman and Reed over the years. Emma's not the only one who's been keeping receipts. Ryan's eyebrows shot up. You knew? Best friend privileges. Sophie started unpacking pastries. Also, I'm a damn good investigative journalist myself. I've been building my own file, waiting for the right moment. Which, by the way, is now. Emma moved to examine the contents of the envelope while Ryan poured coffee from the room's machine. Documents spilled across the desk. Financial records, photographs, transcripts of conversations, 5 years of carefully gathered evidence. Whitman's getting sloppy, Sophie continued, perching on the edge of the desk. He's planning something big, a development project that would displace hundreds of low-income families. The bribes are flowing like water, and he thinks he's untouchable. He's not, Ryan said quietly. Both women turned to look at him. He stood by the window, coffee forgotten in his hand, lawyer mode fully engaged despite his state of undress. The evidence you've gathered, combined with my insider knowledge of their dealings with the firm, we could bring down their entire operation. It would be dangerous, Emma warned, more dangerous than before. They have more to lose now. Ryan set his coffee down and crossed to her, hands settling on her shoulders. So do we, but this time we're ready for them. This time we fight back. Sophie made a small sound of approval. Finally, the Dream Team reunion tour. Also, not to interrupt this very dramatic moment, but you might want to put on more clothes. Lucas will be here soon, and while I fully support this reconciliation, some things require pants. The reminder made them all laugh, breaking the tension. As Emma and Ryan moved to dress, Sophie began organizing the evidence into categories. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and promise. Emma's phone buzzed with a text. A photo from Sophie's assistant showed Lucas at breakfast, happily demolishing a stack of pancakes. Looking at her son's smiling face, Emma felt a fierce surge of protective love. Whitman and his cronies hadn't just threatened her husband's career. They'd stolen years of family memories, forced her son to grow up with divided parents, corrupted the very system Ryan had dedicated his life to upholding. Hey, Ryan's voice was soft as he came up behind her, now properly dressed in last night's shirt and slacks. "What are you thinking?" Emma showed him the photo of Lucas. "That it's time to take back what they stole from us." He pressed a kiss to her temple, then reached for his own phone. "I need to make some calls. There are people at the firm, good people, who've suspected something was wrong but never had proof. With what you and Sophie have gathered, we can build an airtight case," Sophie finished. "But we need to move fast. Once they realize what's happening, they'll try to destroy the evidence," Emma nodded. "And anyone connected to it. Let them try." Ryan's voice held steel. "I'm done letting them hurt my family." A knock at the door made them all freeze. Then Lucas's voice, "Mom? Dad? Aunt Sophie said you'd be here." They scrambled to hide the evidence, Sophie shoving everything back into the envelope, while Emma checked her reflection in the mirror. Ryan opened the door to find their son bouncing with morning energy, still in his pajamas. "Dad, you're still here!" Lucas launched himself into Ryan's arms. "Does this mean you're staying? Are you and Mom friends again? Can we have breakfast together?" Over their son's head, Ryan's eyes met Emma's. In that look was 5 years of loss, 1 night of rediscovery, and a promise for the future, whatever it might hold. "Yes to breakfast," Ryan said, ruffling Lucas's hair. "As for the rest, your mom and I have some things to figure out, but we're going to do it together this time." "As a family," Emma added softly. Lucas beamed, unaware of the storm gathering on their horizon. But as Emma watched Ryan with their son, saw Sophie quietly securing the evidence that could change everything, she felt something she hadn't in 5 years: hope. The battle ahead would be difficult, possibly dangerous. But this time she wasn't facing it alone. This time they would fight together for justice, for their family, and for the love they'd never truly lost. Ryan's corner office in the Chicago branch of Preston and Hart overlooked the river, but he barely noticed the view. His attention was fixed on the 3 people gathered around his conference table: Nathan, his brother and most trusted confidant; Alexandra Chen, the firm's ethics compliance officer; and William Preston himself, founding partner and Ryan's mentor. "You're sure about this?" William asked, his weathered face grave as he studied the evidence spread before them. "Once we move forward, there's no going back." "I'm sure." Ryan's voice was steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Whitman and Reed have been using our firm to legitimize their criminal enterprise. We've unknowingly helped them destroy communities, cover up deaths, and launder money for corrupt officials." Alexandra picked up another document, her expression darkening. "The timeline matches perfectly with irregularities I've noted over the years. Small discrepancies in their financial disclosures, permits that seem to appear overnight." She looked up at Ryan. "Why bring this to us now?" Ryan hesitated, but Nathan jumped in. "Because now we have proof. Does it matter where it came from?" "It matters if we're going to build a case," William said quietly. "Ryan, I need to know everything, including how your ex-wife factors into this." The word ex-wife made Ryan's jaw clench. "Emma discovered their corruption 5 years ago while working on a story. They threatened to destroy my career if she published it. She protected me by leaving." Understanding dawned on William's face. "The sudden divorce, your partnership fast-track, it was all connected." "Yes." Ryan forced himself to maintain eye contact with his mentor. "I didn't know until 2 days ago. Emma's been gathering evidence ever since, building an airtight case against them. And now you want to use our firm's resources to help bring them down," Alexandra concluded. "It's risky. They could claim conflict of interest, try to discredit everything." "Let them try." Ryan straightened, channeling every ounce of courtroom confidence he possessed. We have documents proving they knew about unsafe conditions that led to worker deaths, evidence of bribes paid to city officials, photos linking them to known criminal enterprises. This isn't just about Emma's story anymore. It's about doing what's right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ryan's assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Bennett, your son is here with Ms. Sullivan." Ryan's heart jumped. He hadn't expected Emma to bring Lucas to the office, but of course, it was his weekend for custody. The familiar pain of that arrangement felt sharper now, knowing what he'd lost and why. "Send them in." Lucas burst through the door first, full of 7-year-old energy. "Dad, Mom said we're staying in Chicago for a few more days. Can we go to the aquarium?" Emma followed more slowly, professional in a navy blazer and pencil skirt. The sight of her in his office, something he'd imagined countless times over the years, made his throat tight. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "Lucas was excited to see your office." William stood, smiling warmly. "No interruption at all. I'm William Preston. You must be Emma Sullivan." "Sir." Emma shook his hand, her journalist's composure perfect. "I've followed your firm's environmental protection cases. Impressive work." "Uncle Nathan!" Lucas had spotted Ryan's brother, launching himself at his favorite uncle. "Did you know Dad and Mom danced at the party and had breakfast together and—" "Lucas!" Emma cut in quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Why don't we let your father finish his meeting? We can wait outside." "Actually," Alexandra spoke up, gathering the documents, "I think we're done here. I'll need time to review everything properly." She fixed Ryan with a meaningful look. "We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss strategy." As the others filed out, William paused by Emma. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I always thought there was more to your story. Ryan's not the same man without you." Once they were alone, the office felt suddenly smaller. Lucas immediately gravitated to the window, pressing his face against the glass to watch boats on the river below. "I should have called first," Emma said, smoothing her skirt nervously. "But he wanted to see you, and I thought, with everything happening—" Ryan crossed to her, close enough to smell her perfume but not touching, too aware of their son's presence. "I'm glad you came, both of you. How did it go, with William and Alexandra?" "Better than I expected. Williams always suspected something was wrong with Whitman's dealings, and Alexandra, she's been documenting irregularities for years. They're going to help us." Emma's relief was visible. "Sophie's editor is on board too. Once we have everything in place, we can release the story and file charges simultaneously. No warning, no chance for them to destroy evidence." "Mom," Lucas called from the window, "can we get lunch at that place with the fancy pizza? Dad's treat." They both laughed, tension breaking. "Subtle kid," Ryan said dryly. "He gets that from you," Emma murmured, then bit her lip as she realized what she'd said, how easily they'd slipped back into old patterns of teasing. Ryan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Have dinner with us tonight, at my place. We need to talk about logistics anyway, how we're going to handle everything once this breaks." "Ryan," she glanced at Lucas, still fascinated by the river view. "We can't just go back to how things were. It's not that simple." "I know." He ran his thumb over her knuckles. "But nothing worth having ever is. Let me cook for you both, like I used to." The memory hit them simultaneously. Sunday dinners in their old kitchen, Lucas in his high chair, Emma stealing bites while Ryan pretended not to notice. Simple moments they'd lost, might never have found again if not for a chance meeting. At a gala. "Okay," she whispered. "Dinner." "Dad!" Lucas had finally torn himself away from the window. "Can we go now? I'm starving." Ryan grabbed his jacket, trying not to smile too broadly. "Fancy pizza it is, but first I need to make a quick call." Stepping into the hallway, he dialed Nathan's number. His brother answered immediately. "Everything okay?" I need you to do something for me, Ryan said quietly, watching through the glass as Emma helped Lucas put on his coat. Remember Mom's old recipe box? The one with her lasagna recipe? The famous Bennett family secret? Nathan's voice held knowing amusement. Planning a special dinner. Just get it to my place by 5, and maybe stop by that Italian market Emma loves? The one with the imported olive oil and fresh mozzarella? Nathan chuckled. Consider it done. Just remember, you're supposed to be planning a takedown of corrupt developers, not just trying to win back your wife. Who says I can't? Do both? Ending the call, Ryan rejoined his family, because that's what they were, despite everything. Emma was explaining something about riverboats to Lucas, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. The sight made his chest ache with possibility. Tonight, they would have dinner as a family. Tomorrow, they would begin dismantling the empire that had torn them apart. And somewhere in between, they would find their way back to each other. One meal, one truth, one moment at a time. Ryan's Chicago apartment occupied half of the top floor of a renovated brownstone in Lincoln Park. As Emma followed him up the stairs, Lucas bouncing ahead of them, memories washed over her, helping him choose this place after the divorce, thinking it would be good for Lucas to have a real home with his father, not just a sterile condo downtown. The apartment still smelled of fresh herbs and garlic from Ryan's cooking. He'd left work early to prepare, sending them to the aquarium with Nathan while he got everything ready. Now, stepping inside, Emma's breath caught at how familiar it felt. Family photos on the walls, Lucas's art projects proudly displayed, that old leather armchair Ryan could never part with. "I made Mom's lasagna," Lucas announced proudly, shrugging off his coat. "Well, Dad did most of it, but I helped with the cheese." "Did you now?" Emma smiled, though her heart squeezed at the mention of Ryan's mother's recipe. Catherine Bennett had passed away 2 years ago, another family moment lost to their separation. "He was an excellent sous chef," Ryan said, helping Emma with her coat. His fingers brushed her neck, sending shivers down her spine, though I think more cheese ended up in his mouth than on the lasagna. "Quality control," Lucas said with such perfect seriousness that they both laughed. The kitchen island was set for 3, casual but intimate. A bottle of Emma's favorite red wine breathed beside Ryan's old pasta bowls, the ones they'd bought together at that little shop in Boston, back when they were first married and too poor to afford matching sets. Ryan's phone buzzed as he was serving the wine. His expression darkened briefly as he read the message. "Everything okay?" Emma asked quietly, while Lucas washed his hands. "Alexandra's been monitoring Whitman's activities. There's been unusual movement in some of their offshore accounts." He set the phone down, forcing a smile. "Nothing we didn't expect. Let's eat." The first few bites were quiet, save for Lucas's enthusiastic appreciation. Emma had forgotten how good Ryan's lasagna was, or maybe she'd forced herself to forget, along with 1,000 other details that hurt too much to remember. "Mom!" Lucas's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are you going to stay in Chicago?" The question hung in the air. Emma set down her fork carefully. "Honey, it's complicated. My job is in New York, but Dad's here," Lucas pressed, "and you're not mad at each other anymore. I saw you dancing at the party and kissing on the terrace." Emma's cheeks burned. Ryan cleared his throat. "Buddy, your mom and we're working some things out, but it's going to take time." "Why? You love each other. I heard Aunt Sophie tell Uncle Nathan." Before either of them could respond, Ryan's phone buzzed again. Then Emma's. Then the landline started ringing. Ryan reached for his phone first, face going still as he read. Emma's screen showed multiple messages from Sophie. "Turn on the news, now." The landline kept ringing. Ryan grabbed the remote, switching on the kitchen's small TV. The Chicago Evening News was leading with a breaking story. Prominent developer James Whitman announces surprise press conference. The camera showed Whitman at a podium, silver-haired, and grandfatherly in an expensive suit, deeply concerned about a coordinated attempt to defame our company with false allegations. We have evidence that certain members of the press, working with disgruntled former associates, are planning to publish fabricated stories. Emma's phone buzzed again. Sophie. They know. Someone tipped them off. Lucas, Ryan said calmly. Too calmly. Why don't you go pick out a movie for us to watch after dinner? Something good. Their son looked between them, sensing the tension. But my lasagna. We'll save it, Emma assured him. Movie first, okay? Once Lucas was in the living room, Ryan muted the TV. They're moving faster than we expected. Trying to get ahead of the story, discredit us before we can release anything. How did they know? Emma's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine. We were so careful. The landline rang again. Ryan checked the caller ID, then answered. On speaker. William, turn on channel 7. William Preston's voice crackled through. Whitman just accused our firm of corporate espionage. He's threatening to sue. Emma's breath caught. He's trying to intimidate us. It won't work, Ryan said firmly, but she saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. William, what's our exposure? Minimal if we move fast. Alexandra's already implementing our contingency plan. But Ryan... William paused. They mentioned Emma by name, called her a disgraced journalist with a vendetta against successful developers. The wine glass in Emma's hand cracked, a thin line appearing in the crystal. Ryan was across the kitchen in 2 strides, taking it from her before it could shatter. Mom? Lucas called from the living room. Dad! I picked a movie! Be right there, buddy. Ryan called back, his hand finding Emma's shoulder. To William, he said, implement everything we discussed. I'll be in early tomorrow. After hanging up, he pulled Emma close, pressing his forehead to hers. We knew they'd fight back. We're ready for this, are we? She gripped his shirt, anchoring herself. Ryan, if anything happens to you or Lucas, nothing will happen. He cut in fiercely. We have the truth, Emma. And this time we have each other. Movie time! Lucas bounded back into the kitchen, then stopped short at the sight of his parents embracing. A slow smile spread across his face. I picked the parent trap. Despite everything, Emma laughed. Ryan's chest rumbled with quiet amusement against her cheek. Subtle kid, he said for the second time that day. Very subtle. They settled on the couch together, Lucas between them, the lasagna temporarily forgotten. On the muted TV, Whitman was still speaking, his benevolent grandfather act firmly in place. Emma watched him gesture emphatically, promising legal action against his persecutors, and felt a familiar mix of rage and fear rise in her throat. Then Ryan's hand found hers. Behind Lucas's head, fingers intertwining, and some of the fear ebbed. Their son snuggled closer as the movie started, sighing contentedly. Mom? He whispered as the opening credits rolled. Even if you have to go back to New York sometimes, will you come back to us? Emma met Ryan's eyes over their son's head, saw her own longing reflected there. Yes, she whispered back, I'll always come back. Outside, the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of fire. Somewhere in the city, their enemies were plotting, preparing for war. But here, in this moment, Emma allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness. Not despite the coming storm, but because of what they'd already survived to get here. Ryan's thumb traced patterns on her palm. A silent promise. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would fight for their family, their truth, and the love they'd never truly lost. Together they would win. Lucas shushed them as the movie began, unaware of the gathering shadows, secure in the warmth of his parents' love. And for now, that was enough. The Preston and Hart conference room hummed with tense energy at 6 a.m. Coffee cups and laptops crowded the massive table as Ryan's hastily assembled team worked to counter Whitman's offensive. Emma sat beside Sophie, both journalists deep in their own documentation, while Alexandra Chen coordinated with the firm's crisis management team. "They're trying to paint this as a personal vendetta," William Preston said, scanning another news alert on his tablet. "Claiming Emma fabricated evidence because of her connection to Ryan, which is exactly why we need to release everything now," Sophie argued. "The full story, all the evidence, before they can spin it any further." Ryan stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear as he listened to Nathan's update. His brother had taken Lucas to school, noting a black SUV that had followed them halfway, there before peeling off. "Access card logs show someone entered the records room at 3 a.m., Alexandra reported, looking up from her laptop. "Nothing appears to be missing, but they're searching for the original Whitman files," Ryan finished, ending his call. "Trying to find anything they can use against us." Emma's hands clenched around her coffee cup. "Ryan, if they're all ready. Watching Lucas." "Nathan's arranging private security," he assured her, though his own worry was evident in the tension around his eyes. "The school's been notified. He's safe." "The real question," William interjected, "is who tipped them off. This response was too quick, too coordinated. Someone knew we were building a case." Before anyone could respond, Emma's phone lit up with a text. The color drained from her face as she read it. "Emma?" Ryan moved to her side instantly. "What is it?" She handed him the phone wordlessly. On the screen was a photo taken through a window, Emma and Ryan in his kitchen the night before, holding each other while Lucas was in the other room. The message below it was simple. "Reunions can be so fragile. Would be a shame if something happened to this lovely family scene." Ryan's jaw clenched. "They're watching the apartment." "Not just the apartment," Sophie said grimly, turning her own phone around. She had received a similar photo, this one of her leaving her hotel that morning. "They're watching all of us." Alexandra was already on the phone with building security. William moved to the conference room doors, speaking quietly with his assistant about implementing emergency protocols. "We need to move now," Ryan decided, his voice hard, "before they can hurt anyone else." "Agreed," William said, returning to the table. "Alexandra, how quickly can we file the injunction? The paperwork's ready. The conference room doors burst open. Ryan's assistant rushed in, face pale. "Mr. Bennett, there's been a break-in at your apartment. The police." "Are there now?" Emma felt the floor drop out from under her. Ryan's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "Was anything taken?" William demanded. They destroyed everything. Furniture, photos, Lucas's artwork." The assistant swallowed hard. "And they left a message, painted on the wall." "What message?" Ryan's voice was deadly quiet. "Family or truth? Choose wisely." The room erupted into motion. William was on the phone with the police commissioner, Alexandra coordinating with building security, Sophie already drafting a press release. But Emma could only focus on the way Ryan's hand trembled slightly in hers. "They're trying to make us back down," she whispered, "using our family against us, just like before." Ryan turned to her, his eyes fierce. "I'm not losing you again, either of you. Then we end this. Today." Emma stood, drawing on every ounce of investigative instinct she'd honed over the years. "Sophie, how fast can your editor get the story ready?" "Give me 2 hours." "Alexandra," Ryan asked. "The injunction, ready to file the moment you give the word." "William," Emma turned to Ryan's mentor, "the firm." The older lawyer's face was set with determination. "We stand with you, both of you." Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. "Lucas is safe. Private security in place. He's asking for you both." Emma read the message over Ryan's shoulder, fresh fear coursing through her. He must be terrified. "Then let's finish this," Ryan said firmly. "For him, for us, for everyone they've hurt." He turned to the room at large. "Sophie, release the story. Alexandra, file the injunction. William, contact the FBI. We have enough evidence of interstate corruption to bring them in now." Emma squeezed his hand. "What about Lucas?" "We get him, then take you both somewhere safe until this breaks." He looked around the room. "Everyone knows their part?" Nods all around. The team dispersed with purpose, leaving Ryan and Emma alone. In the conference room, the morning sun cast long shadows across the floor as Ryan pulled her close. "I should have protected you both 5 years ago," he murmured into her hair. "We should have faced it together," she corrected, pulling back to meet his eyes. "But we're fixing that now." His phone buzzed again. Nathan, sending a photo of Lucas in his classroom, smiling bravely at the camera. The sight steeled there. "Resolve." "Ready?" Ryan asked softly. Emma straightened, journalist determination replacing fear. "Ready." They walked out of the conference room hand in hand, leaving the threats and destroyed apartment behind. Ahead lay the fight of their lives, for justice, for truth, and for the family they'd finally found their way back to. In his classroom, across town, Lucas Bennett showed his best friend the photo his uncle had just taken. "See, I told you my parents would fix everything. They're superheroes, you know. Only their superpowers are love and justice." Ali, the innocent faith in his voice, would have broken his parents' hearts. But it would also have strengthened their resolve, because sometimes the greatest acts of heroism aren't about saving the world. They're about saving your family, your truth, and the love that never truly died. The story broke like a thunderclap across Chicago. Sophie's article, published simultaneously in 3 major newspapers, laid bare the full scope of Whitman and Reed's corruption. Within hours, the FBI had executed search warrants at their offices, and Alexandra's injunction had frozen their assets. But Emma barely registered the victory. She sat in the back of Ryan's car as they raced toward Lucas's school, her phone continuously updating with news alerts. Beside her, Ryan spoke rapidly into his earpiece, coordinating with the security team. "Nathan's already there," he reported, ending the call. "No sign of trouble, but—" The car screeched to a halt. Their driver swore softly. Through the windshield, Emma saw what had stopped them. A black SUV blocking the intersection, 2 men in suits emerging. "Back up," Ryan ordered the driver. "Now!" But another vehicle had appeared behind them, boxing them in. Emma's heart hammered as she recognized one of the men approaching, James Whitman, Jr., the developer's son and chief enforcer. Ryan's hand found hers. "Emma, whatever happens—" "Mr. Bennett!" Whitman Jr.'s voice boomed across the street. "Just a friendly conversation." "Call Nathan," Ryan whispered, then stepped out of the car, positioning himself between Emma and the approaching men. "James, bit dramatic, don't you think?" Emma's fingers shook as she texted Nathan. "Whitman, Jur has us blocked in 4 blocks from school. FBI." She could hear Ryan keeping them talking, lawyer mode fully engaged. "You've caused quite a mess," Whitman Jr. said, casual as if discussing the weather. "Dad's very disappointed. He gave you everything. Partnership track, premium clients, a perfect reputation. He gave me blood money," Ryan replied evenly, "made me complicit in his crimes." "Crimes?" Whitman Jr. laughed. "Business, Ryan, just business, like this is just business." One of his men moved suddenly, reaching for something inside his jacket. Emma's warning cry died in her throat as police sirens exploded from every direction. Black SUVs with FBI markings squealed around both corners, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. "FBI, on the ground!" The next few minutes passed in a blur. Whitman Jr. and his men were face down on the pavement. Ryan was pulling Emma from the car, holding her close as agents secured the scene. Her phone buzzed. "Nathan, Lucas safe, coming to you." Perfect timing, Ryan said as William Preston emerged from one of the FBI vehicles. We've been tracking them since the story broke, William explained, waiting for them to make a move. He turned to Emma. Your friend Sophie's article did the trick. Whitman Sr. is already in custody, along with half their board. Emma sagged against Ryan's side, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. Lucas, safe with Nathan and the security team, William smiled grimly. Though I'd say a few days away from Chicago might be wise. Give the FBI time to round up all the players. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Mom! Dad! They turned to see Lucas running toward them, Nathan close behind. Emma dropped to her knees, gathering her son close as Ryan enveloped them both. Uncle Nathan said you caught the bad guys, Lucas said into Emma's shoulder. Like real superheroes. The FBI caught them, buddy, Ryan corrected, but their son shook his head. But you and Mom found the truth. That's what superheroes do, right? Find the truth and protect people? Emma met Ryan's eyes over Lucas's head, seeing her own emotions reflected there, relief, love, and lingering fear. Mr. Bennett, an FBI agent approached. We'll need statements from both you and Miss Sullivan. Of course. Ryan straightened, keeping one hand on Lucas's shoulder. But first, I'm taking my family somewhere safe. The agent nodded, understanding. We can arrange protection at... Already handled, Nathan cut in. The Bennett Lake House, off the grid, private security, I trust. Emma remembered the lake house from their early marriage, peaceful summers swimming and stargazing before careers and complications got in the way. Lucas has school, she started weakly. Lucas has parents who just helped take down a corrupt business empire, Nathan pointed out. I think he's earned a few days off. Can we really go to the lake? Lucas asked, excitement breaking through. His worry. Can we make s'mores and go swimming? And yes to all of it, Ryan promised. But first, we need to talk to the FBI. Nathan, can you... Already on it. His brother was typing on his phone. House will be ready in 3 hours. Security team's en route. Sophie's meeting us there. Says she needs quotes for the follow-up story anyway. As the chaos of arrests and evidence collection continued around them, Emma found herself drawn back into Ryan's embrace. Lucas squirmed between them, safe and solid and real. I love you, Ryan murmured against her hair. Both of you, so much. Emma closed her eyes, breathing him in. We love you too. Does this mean you're staying? Lucas asked hopefully. Both of you? Together? Before either could respond, William called out, Ryan! Emma! They found something at Whitman's office. You need to see this. The moment broke, but the promise of it lingered. As they followed William toward the FBI vehicles, Ryan's hand found Emma's again. We're not running anymore, he said quietly. Whatever they found, whatever comes next, we face it together. Emma squeezed his hand, feeling Lucas's smaller, one slip into her other palm. Together, she agreed. Behind them, Whitman Jr. was being led to a police car, his facade of power finally broken. But Emma barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on her family, the husband she'd never stopped loving, the son who'd never lost faith, and the future they would build together, stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. The lake house waited, promising peace after the storm. But first, there was truth to face, justice to secure, and a love story to finally write its proper ending. The Bennett Lake House stood exactly as Emma remembered it, a sprawling cedar and stone retreat nestled among towering pines. As their car wound up the private drive, the late afternoon sun turned Lake Michigan into molten gold. Lucas had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from the day's events. Home sweet home, Nathan said from the driver's seat. Security. Teams already swept the premises. Sophie's inside setting up her command center. Ryan smiled tiredly. Let me guess, she's taken over the sunroom? With enough tech to launch a space shuttle, Nathan confirmed. She says the Wi-Fi upgrade I had installed was, quote, absolutely necessary for journalistic integrity. Emma smiled, remembering how Sophie had always coveted this place during their weekend visits years ago. The sunroom, with its wall of windows overlooking the lake, had been her favorite spot to write. As they pulled up to the house, Emma's phone buzzed with a message from William. Files decoded. You both need to see this. Video conference in an hour? Ryan read the message over her shoulder, his hand tightening on hers. Nathan. I've got Lucas, his brother assured them. Go. Deal with whatever this is. The inside of the lake house smelled of pine and coffee. Sophie had indeed transformed the sunroom into a mobile newsroom, multiple laptops displaying different news feeds about the Whitman case. She looked up as they entered, her expression grave. William sent me a preview, she said without preamble. You should sit down for this. Emma sank onto the familiar leather couch, Ryan beside her, as Sophie connected the video call. William's face appeared on the main screen, Alexandra Chen visible beside him. What did you find? Ryan asked quietly. Evidence that goes back further than we thought, William began. Emma wasn't their first target. They've been using this playbook for years, threatening families, forcing silence. But that's not the worst of it. Alexandra stepped forward. We found a file about Catherine Bennett's accident. The air left Emma's lungs. Beside her, Ryan went completely still. His mother's car accident 2 years ago, the one they'd all believed was just that, an accident. No, Ryan breathed. They wouldn't. They did. William's voice was heavy with regret. She'd discovered irregularities in some of Whitman's charitable donations, was planning to report it to the board. The accident happened 2 days later. Emma reached for Ryan's hand, finding it ice cold. That's why they were so confident I'd run, she whispered. They'd done it before. They knew threatening family worked. There's more, Alexandra said. We found evidence that they were planning something similar for Lucas's school bus. After they saw you together at the gala, they decided to escalate. A sound escaped Ryan's throat, something between a growl and a sob. Emma felt the world tilt dangerously. They're all in custody now, William assured them quickly. The FBI's building an airtight case. With this evidence... I need air, Ryan cut in, standing abruptly. He strode out onto the deck, disappearing, into the gathering dusk. Emma found him at the end of the dock, staring out at the lake. The setting sun painted his profile in shades of gold and shadow, highlighting the tension in his jaw. I'm so sorry about your mother, she said softly, stepping up beside him. I gave the eulogy at her funeral, he replied, voice raw. Talked about destiny and accidents and God's plan, all while those bastards... His hands gripped the railing. And then they targeted our son. But we stopped them, Emma reminded, him covering his hand with hers. We fought back, together. Mom loved you so much, Ryan said suddenly. After you left, she kept telling me there had to be more to the story. That the Emma she knew would never... He broke off, emotion choking his words. She was right. Emma moved closer, wrapping her arms around him from behind. The Emma she knew. The Emma who loved her son, her husband, her family more than anything. She never left. She was just lost for a while. Ryan turned in her embrace, pulling her close as the first tears fell. They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon, sharing grief and rage and relief. Daddy. Lucas's voice came softly from the dock. Are you crying? They turned to find their son watching them, concern on his small face. Nathan stood a few yards back, giving them space. Come here, buddy, Ryan called, voice thick. Lucas ran to them, and they enfolded him in their embrace. Your grandma was a hero too, Ryan told him. Just like your mom, strong and brave and always fighting for what's right. Is that why the bad guys hurt her? Lucas asked quietly. Emma's heart clenched, but Ryan answered steadily, "Yes. But you know what? She won in the end, because the truth came out. Justice won. Like in my superhero comics," Lucas nodded sagely. "The bad guys might win some battles, but the good guys always win the war." Over their son's head, Emma met Ryan's eyes. In them, she saw the same fierce love and determination she felt, to protect their child, to honor Catherine's memory, to never let darkness win again. "Come on," Nathan called from the dock. "Sophie's ordered enough pizza to feed an army, and she's threatening to start without us." As they walked back to the house, Lucas running ahead with Nathan, Ryan pulled Emma close again. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just for a few days, not just until this is over. Stay for good." Emma looked up at him, at the face she'd loved for so long, through joy and pain and separation and reunion. "Are you sure? After everything?" "I'm sure of one thing," he cut in. "Every moment without you, without this, has been half a life. I don't want to live half a life anymore." The lake house glowed warmly behind them, voices and laughter spilling out onto the deck. Sophie was regaling Nathan and Lucas with what sounded like a highly embellished version of the day's events, complete with sound effects. "Then I'll stay," Emma whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "For good." They walked back to the house hand in hand, toward their family, their future, and the love that had survived every storm to lead them home. 3 months later, the Grand Medallion Ballroom was once again filled with Chicago's elite. This time, the Palmer Foundation Gala celebrated a different cause, the establishment of the Catherine Bennett Legal Defense Fund, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and their families. Emma stood at the same spot where she'd first seen Ryan after 5 years apart, watching him now as he finished his speech. He looked different, lighter somehow, despite the weight of recent months. The grey at his temples caught the light, as he smiled, thanking the donors who had helped make the fund possible. "Mom?" Lucas tugged at her emerald silk dress, a new one, but similar to that fateful night. "Can I go get dessert with Uncle Nathan?" "Just don't recreate your chocolate." "Fountain experiments," she warned, smoothing his bow tie. It was perfectly straight this time. Ryan had taught him how to tie it himself. As Lucas scampered off with Nathan, Sophie appeared at Emma's side, champagne in hand. "Quite a different scene from 3 months ago," she observed. "Though I notice you still can't take your eyes off him." Emma smiled, accepting the offered glass. "Some things never change." "Speaking of change," Sophie nodded toward Emma's left hand, where her engagement ring had been restored to its rightful place. "Have you set a date for the re-wedding yet?" "Next month at the lake house. Small ceremony, just family and close friends." Emma's smile widened. "Lucas is insisting on being best man and ring bearer. Says he's earned the right, considering his parent trap operation was so successful." "Smart kid," Sophie laughed, "though I think he had some help." She winked, then grew serious. "Have you seen the news? Whitman's sentencing is tomorrow." Emma nodded. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. James Whitman Sr. and his son would spend decades in prison, along with most of their corrupt empire. The evidence about Catherine's death had ensured no mercy from the judge. "Ryan's not going," Emma said quietly. "Says he doesn't want to waste another minute of his life on them. We're taking Lucas to the aquarium instead." "Good choice." Sophie squeezed her arm. "Oh, William's waving me over. Probably wants more. Details for the press release about the fund." As Sophie moved away, Ryan finished his speech to enthusiastic applause. He made his way through the crowd toward Emma, stopping to shake hands and accept congratulations. But his eyes never left hers. "Dance with me?" he asked, when he finally reached her, holding out his hand. Emma set down her champagne. "Always." They moved onto the dance floor as the orchestra began playing The way you look tonight, their song, now and always. Ryan pulled her close, wedding ring cool against her back where his hand rested. Lucas finally master that bow tie? She asked, smiling up at him. After only 3 attempts, Ryan's eyes crinkled with pride. He's persistent. Like his father. Like his mother, Ryan corrected, spinning her gently. The woman who never gave up on finding the truth, even when it cost her everything. Not everything, Emma said softly. We found our way back. Over Ryan's shoulder, she could see Lucas at the dessert table with Nathan, carefully selecting chocolates with the serious concentration of a jewel appraiser. Sophie sat with William and Alexandra, likely planning the fund's next moves. The family they'd built, strengthened by trial and time. I've been thinking, Ryan said, drawing her attention back, about what you said last week about keeping your apartment in New York. Emma tensed slightly. They'd agreed she'd move back to Chicago, but she'd been hesitant to give up her New York place entirely. Ryan, I think you're right, he cut. You've built a career there, important work, and with the fund expanding, he took a breath. I've been offered a position heading up the New York office's pro bono division, 3 days a week there, 2 in Chicago, if you're interested in splitting our time between both cities. Emma's steps faltered. But your practice here, the partnership, is less important than our family being together. His hand tightened on hers. Lucas's school has an excellent exchange program with a sister school in New York. He's already excited about the possibility of having 2 homes, though I think that's mostly because Sophie promised him Broadway shows. You'd do that? Emma searched his face. Change everything. Haven't you figured it out yet? Ryan's smile was soft. You are everything. You and Lucas. The rest is just geography. Emma rose on her toes to kiss him, not caring about the other. Couples on the dance floor. When they parted, she saw Lucas watching them with satisfaction from across the room. I think our son is plotting again, she murmured. Good, Ryan replied. His plans tend to work out pretty well. The song ended, transitioning into something slower. Neither of them moved to leave the dance floor. Outside, Chicago's lights twinkled like stars, the same view that had witnessed their reunion 3 months ago. But everything was different now, stronger, surer, built on truth instead of secrets. I love you, Emma said simply, because she could, because she never had to hide it again. I love you too. Ryan's forehead pressed against hers. Welcome home. And there, in the same ballroom where their journey back to each other had begun, Emma and Ryan Bennett danced toward their future. Not a perfect one. Those don't exist, but a real one, hard-won and precious, built on the foundation of a love that had survived separation, secrets, and sacrifice to emerge stronger than ever. Lucas eventually joined them on the dance floor, insisting on cutting in. As Ryan lifted their son between them, all 3 swaying together and laughing, Emma felt the last pieces of her heart settle into place. The truth had finally set them free. Love had brought them home, and their story was really just beginning. After all, the best love stories aren't about perfect people or easy choices. They're about real people who choose each other again and again, through storms and sunshine, through loss and triumph, through every twist and turn of fate. And by that measure, their love story was just about perfect. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.